Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As was expressed, my background and work has been predominantly around trying to shift various institutions and cultures to be more accommodating, to be more inclusive, in light of what I believe are the very principles that sustain a plural environment or democracy like the ones that we are all privileged to live in. And with that, of course, becomes challenge, there is strife, there is grief, but overall, I believe that we move towards a positive outcome, and workshops and spaces like this really invigorate us, I found, and also can build allegiances and alliances among disparate individuals from disparate backgrounds. And so, again, happy to share space and time with you all. I'm going to be going through a few key pieces of information that I hope is of service to you and of benefit to the work that you're currently doing and trying to do to increase the extent to which folks within an organization or within your space are culturally competent, so as to reduce ASD exclusion within particular environments and spaces. And so I'm going to jump right in. When we talk about cultural competence, of course, the root of all of that is this idea of culture. And when we think about culture, I'm just going to read a few pieces for you from what you're seeing before you. Actually, I'm seeing if the slides are showing properly. Perfect, they are. Okay. So culture is integral to the success of any worthy endeavor or pursuit in an organization, institution, or business. And it sets up for us because it informs the habits and conduct of the everyday things that we simply see as mundane oftentimes. It sets up for us opportunities for great things to be done if the culture is set right. And when we talk about noteworthy things that are done within any institution, it's always rooted in the cultural setup or the precursor that came before it, right? So without the culture being set properly, it's hard to imagine something being done correctly. So you feel culture before you know it, right? And I think all of us can think back to a time and space where we felt the culture of a space or an environment before we actually knew what it rested upon and the various players and actors that contributed to it being the way it is. There is a very important novelist and philosopher named George Lamming. He's Bayesian, and he grew up in colonial Barbados. And when he was asked in an interview, what was it like living within a colonial construct or space, he said the following: although there was no physical cruelty, it was the breeding ground for every uncertainty of the self. So although there was no physical cruelty, living in that context, in that cultural setting, was the breeding ground for every uncertainty of the self. So when we're talking about building institutions that are culturally competent, we're talking about building institutions that are set up to ensure that that level of uncertainty that most of us experience when we leave an institutional space, whether we are the service users or we're the actual practitioners in the space, is reduced. Because we know for a fact from research and studies, psychological perspectives, neurodiversity, and things of that nature, that confidence is one of the most significant components of success in this world and at this particular place and time. So I was going to read out a couple of lines for you to really help us ground ourselves in what we mean when we talk about culture. So culture reflects both the ideas that support our way of being and of doing in a particular setting, as well as the actual being and doing that can be carried out within a particular setting. So we're talking about ideas that underpin something, as well as what is actually allowed to occur as a result of those ideas that underpin something. And in brief, culture is the aggregate of what people perceive, know, and do. It is the aggregate of what people perceive, know, and do. There's a quote by Seth Godin, who is a very significant and foundational organizational psychological manager and structural theorist. So what he does is he goes into spaces and he tries to revamp that organizational culture. And so he's done a really great job at doing so in North American context. And just to highlight before I read the quote, every day, and we know this all from our lived experiences, every day people are trying to negotiate just how much of themselves they can bring into a specific space outside of their own homes. And that goes for, again, service users, as well as practitioners and providers of particular services within an institution. Every day, people are trying to negotiate how much of themselves they can bring into a specific space. So from the perspective of leadership, of individuals with power, managers within an environment. Setting the culture correct is the first great thing you can do if you want to ensure that folks experience more self-confidence and more certainty about who they are and what they can actually do within your space. Sorry, I think the sound went out. Something chipped. My apologies. Okay, so the quote. Leaders create the conditions where people choose new actions. The choices are voluntary. They're made by people who see a new landscape, new opportunities, and new options. You can't make people change, but you can create an environment where they choose to. Okay, so you can't make people change an environment, but you can create an environment where they choose to. Now, what you're going to see on the next slide is a setup between two distinct ways in which cultures can merge or be diametrically opposed. And when you look at this, you'll probably understand exactly what categories they fit within. So on the left, we see a culture that's predicated on the following things: doing things right, or doing the right things, right? So doing the right things on the left. And typically in those types of cultural settings, the focus is on things being scalable. Technical ability and know-how is seen as a benefit. Things are standardized, very rigid, and things are cost-effective. Now, these attitudes, if they are relied upon strictly and on their own accord, lead to oppressive actions being taken. Oppressive actions being taken under the guise of things being done, doing the right things, right? Just executing and flowing through the things that you think are supposed to be done in a certain way, processes. And they ultimately lead to inequality and injustice. And so the culture that's being set on the left side is one that we would consider in theoretical space as colonial, right? And they produce a number of sectoral and organizational pressures on an individual. And they're deeply rooted in bias and prejudice with regards to how things need to go, because they've always gone this way. On the right, you see a culture that's predicated upon doing things the right way, right? So this is a culture that's set up or predicated upon ethical organizational structures and processes. And the goal here is to be careful, use context to inform decision-making, be relational at the very heart of what you are doing, always prioritizing and thinking about the human in the middle of it all, and being resourced, right? Resourcing yourself adequately to be relational and to be able to have the time and bandwidth to spend on thinking about context and being careful in how you operate and move through things, right? And this is a culture that's predicated upon trust, bravery, and a deep understanding of democracy. Now, there are reparative actions that manifest within a culture like this, and it leads to equality and justice. Now, all cultures in any organization or institution, insofar as they embedded in a North American context, would hopefully be an amalgamation of both of these cultures. And if you can balance it, great for you. Most cultural settings within North America cannot. They struggle to balance these two things. So there's a constant tug of war and constant conflict between the two. Right? Doing the right things and doing things the right way. And so as we move forward and you listen to the rest of the presentations today, I want you to think about one aspect of your organizational culture, either in terms of service delivery or service creation and management, that you or others have struggled to bring balance to, that ultimately leans too far to the left of the Venn diagram. What is one thing you believe would have to change in order to bring balance to it? Okay. All right. Moving forward, so one of the core problems of ASD is reciprocal social interaction, right? So as a result, and given that power imbalances and how they are managed are at the heart of all social relationships, differences in cultural beliefs about appropriate social behavior can affect the accurate diagnosis of ASD, as we all know. So for instance, in Asian cultures, direct eye contact with authorities is considered to be a sign of disrespect. However, reduced eye contact is considered to be a part of the impaired nonverbal behavioral criteria for a diagnosis of ASD. So by extension, children raised in Asian cultures, for example, may avoid eye contact, not because of ASD, because of the social norms of their cultural makeup, right? So this was developed by Pamela Hayes and then used by autism researchers world round. And it's called the addressing framework, which many of you might be familiar with. And the goal is to help practitioners think more carefully while the types of social interactions their clients are entering into with them and others as they try to aid and support families, right? So when we think about the addressing model, we're talking about the following. The goal is to ensure all aspects of the client's identity are considered by thinking through the power relations connected to the following, right? Age and generational influences, developmental differently able designation, differently abled acquisition through time, religious spiritual orientation, ethnicity, race identity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, indigenous heritage, national origin, gender. Right? So when a child is noted to have delays in speech, development, abnormal repetitive behaviors, and problems with reciprocal social interaction, a decision to seek evaluation may be prompted. Because diagnostic instruments and standards may be different in different cultures, there may be significant differences in time from detection to diagnosis. So there are 3 examples of this that really we need to take more seriously as we're thinking about cultural competence and the relationship with ASD clients. So in a review of Indian literature on ASD, it was stated that the greater emphasis on conformity to social norms and the value placed on social relatedness in Indians could result in Indian parents recognizing social symptoms earlier and seeking treatment. My apologies. So a recent report describing referral patterns in sample of 50 consecutive clinic cases of ASD in a hospital in Saudi Arabia found that the presenting complaint for most of the cases was communication problems and that girls were diagnosed at a later age than boys. The investigators suggest that the delay in diagnosis in girls may result from societal expectations that boys be more outgoing. Therefore, those girls with social deficits may be considered simply shy or lacking opportunities to interact. The last one I want to go through is about limited research of ASD in Africa. So a recent study examined healthcare workers' knowledge of ASD in Nigeria and highlighted gaps in understanding social impairments and repetitive and restrictive interests. In one study, it was reported that Africans are less likely to use psychiatric treatment and more likely to pursue traditional healers because of cultural beliefs embedded in historical experiences, i.e. the transatlantic slave trade. Right? So going forward, when we think about many of the families.
This is an announcement from
So you think about the many families we are trying to support and are embedded in and coming out of cultures where stigma surrounding ASD designation is drastically intimidating and pernicious. In addition to some of those very cultures, they have no language for ABA or autism. So according to a study done in 2011 by Grinker, larger and more competent service provisions are in general more likely to exist within communities where there is a relatively greater level of understanding and awareness towards autism compared to contexts where awareness is lower. So therefore, in particular cultural contexts where autism service provision is lower than compared with, for example, Western contexts, we should expect to find a relatively greater prevalence of stigma. This issue likely contributes to the problematic understanding of autism within particular cultures in general. Now, one tool that I've used with various corporate clients is trying to expose them to something called the Intercultural Competence Inventory. And so what this is it provides the capability to shift perspective and adapt behavior to cultural difference and commonality. Intercultural competence reflects the degree to which cultural differences and commonalities in values, expectations, beliefs, and practices are effectively bridged and inclusive environment is achieved, and specific differences that exist in our organization or institution are addressed from a mutual adaptation perspective. So the 2 polar ends of the spectrum are monocultural mindsets and intercultural global mindsets. So a monocultural mindset makes sense of cultural differences and commonalities based on one's own cultural values and practices, uses broad stereotypes to identify cultural difference, and leads to less complex perceptions and experiences of cultural difference and commonality. Intercultural global mindsets make sense of cultural differences and commonalities based on one's own and other cultures' values and practices, uses cultural generalizations to recognize cultural differences, and this leads overall to more sensitivity. Now, the IDI competency assessment results in both an organizational and an individual profile. So it's a psychometric assessment that you can do within your organization. And it splits profiles into 4 distinct orientations. So the first one is the perceived orientation, reflects where your group places itself along the intercultural development continuum. And this reflects how the group sees itself when interacting with culturally diverse individuals and groups. The next is the developmental orientation. So indicates your group's primary orientation toward cultural differences and commonalities along the continuum as assessed by the IDI. The next one is the orientation gap, which is the difference along the intercultural development continuum between the group's perceived orientation and developmental orientation. So the larger the gap, the more likely the group may misread how effective they are in bridging across cultural differences. Also, the larger the orientation gap, the more likely the group may be surprised by the discrepancy between the perceived orientation score and the developmental orientation score. And so the last profile would be the learning orientations. So these are the next steps to take in further development of intercultural competence. So for example, in your group's developmental orientation, there is minimization of cultural difference. Then the leading orientations, or the learning orientations, would be acceptance and adaptation. So we would be finding out strategic ways for you within your organization to lead more towards acceptance and adaptation based upon the culture of the organization and also the culture from which you come from. So we'll be tapping on those cultural linkages and uniquenesses to get you to move from minimization to acceptance and adaptation. And so with that, I'll pause on my portion of the presentation and open it back up to Shelley to bring on our other presenter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for that. Next, we will have Priyanka Paul joining us, sharing some of her experiences. So everyone, welcome, Priyanka.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Geneva Center for Autism, for inviting me to speak. And thank you, Dr. Joseph Smith, for that enlightening presentation. So what does it look like to receive services that are both autism inclusive and culturally competent? As an autistic person of color, finding services that really understood my diagnosis and cultural background have been extremely difficult. I remember a time in my life when I needed support from an in-treatment center. I went there with high expectations. To prepare myself, I read somewhere that if I made notes, people would understand me better. Sorry. I went there with high expectations. To prepare myself, I read somewhere that if I made notes, people would understand me better. I was wrong. When I presented my notes to the intake team, they questioned who wrote them, when I wrote them, and why I had them. They were hesitant to look at them. They started the process by making me feel like a liar. I grew up learning that I had to be perfect for everyone. I couldn't show my struggles. Much like many people of color, our parents came here and taught us that we needed to act like everything was okay. So when I went to the center, I hid that I was not okay, and they believed me. They didn't do any form of a proper assessment to recognize that I was masking. Girls with autism are good at masking, and compounded with being BIPOC, you are a master masker. It's a crisis in of itself to ask for help. It's a crisis within a crisis, just to make the call and get help. They also called my mom to see if I would be okay going home. I was scared they were calling my mom. My concern was that my mom would be angry when I got home because now I've embarrassed the family. The cultural factor here is that I needed time to talk and feel comfortable. It's complex. In some cultures, there's a strong emphasis on looks and appearances in public. Service providers couldn't see that my mom was masking her own feelings. Also, autism is largely misunderstood in India, and parents who have not adapted to the Western culture don't understand. They have their own set of traditional ways that makes this story more complex. It's a stigma to ask for help, and so many times, parents of color have asked for help and have been burned by the system because they are misunderstood and labeled as bad parents. Now, I ask you all, can you blame my mom? So, how can we make services autism inclusive and culturally competent? I would like to leave you with some things to think about. First, the idea of acting like everything is okay. We are conditioned to look okay because the neighbors will talk, the people around you will talk, And children's aid will take you away from your parents. So you don't tell people that things are wrong. But you come here and it's a cultural shock to be vulnerable and ask for help. ABA terms are not translated in the Eastern world. It's a Western concept that no one takes the time to truly teach a person from another country. So how are you teaching their child Western terminology to explain terms and concepts that no one uses outside of North America? Service providers, how are you ensuring that parents actually understand what's going on in their child's session instead of just being complacent with the treatment? Third, a judgment-free zone with lots and lots of patience. Understanding that you can give me a resource, but just giving me a sheet of paper with resources doesn't mean that your job is done. The real work is the encouragement to actually trust the services and make the initial phone calls. Understanding the complexities of culture and diagnosis help create a judgment-free zone. And 4, I liked the people that listened and didn't take anything personally and understood that it wasn't about them. Listening is powerful. And what has left the biggest impact within my experience with service providers has been when people have seen beyond my autism and taken the time to get to know me. And now 5, I challenge all BIPOC service providers. Are you code switching or are you supporting your BIPOC clients? You are in a position of privilege. The burden on BIPOC staff is huge because they have to take on all the problems and listen to all the venting that no one else is willing to listen to. Sometimes it's just about venting and not finding a solution and not just checking it off as problem is done. It's not that easy. So, and wanting to help me is one thing, but actually knowing how to help me is another thing. So for the BIPOC community and all service providers, if you're not willing to truly go the extra mile, then don't offer because you are just adding more pain and disappointment. And yeah, thank you. I think I've said what I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Priyanka, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. We're at the end of the presentations by both Dr. Smith and Pri, and would love to open up the conversation to all of you joining us here today. So if you do have questions or comments, please leave them in the chat box so that we can get these questions to Dr. Smith and to Priyanka. While we're waiting for that, I do want to say, you know, what really struck me, Dr. Smith, at the top of your presentation, talking about, you know, that work that all of us do every day of how much of ourselves do we present depending on the context, depending on the room that we're in. That's a lot of mental work, sometimes physical work, emotional work, let alone you think about the amount of energy that takes, and then everything, Pri, that you so fantastically just described from your experience that is on top of that. And so imagine, as you said, Pri, when you reach the doors of support and you're hoping you're going to get help in whatever manner from a particular agency or person, to then have to then listen to them and, you know, navigate it through their own lens, which may not match your own experiences, what you actually need. And I think, you know, for myself, if I, you know, were to comment, I think, you know, a lot of us, you know, we strive for excellence, or we strive to be the best at something, whatever that something is for you. But I think what really strikes me is that we want to wake up and just be, whatever be is for ourselves, and not have to navigate all those things before we've even left the house. You know, we want to just be and experience joy and experience who we are in our own wonderful selves. So we can see, you know, from what both of you have shared, how much work needs to go into agencies and persons, not just agencies, but agencies, caregivers, everyone, communities around us, the work that we need to put into learning and how to be more inclusive and connect with others in a way that might be different for us, hard for us, whatever words, but the work is important to be done if we're truly going to make an impact. So any questions from our audience today, comments that we'd like to share? Dr. Smith, anything you'd want to comment on what Pri has to say, or vice versa? Pri, anything you want to comment on Dr. Smith's portion of the presentation? I open up the floor. I have a lot of, I don't know if you guys can see the comments, but a lot of comments. Just really enjoying a lot of the visuals, the quotes you provided, Dr. Smith, and great accolades, Pri, for how you described your lived experience.
Dr. Smith, if you just press on comments, you should be able to see the comments.
Thank you, Pri. No, just about to make a comment too. You did a fabulous job. And what you described really resonates, because what you were talking about in many respects was the emotional attacks all racialized folk pay when they are going into an institution. And that very same emotional attacks is something that I was kind of echoing a bit at the beginning of my presentation when I was highlighting, when you leave an institution, you can measure how successful your time there was by how much confidence you leave with. And typically, if there was an equation, right, the more emotional attacks that you pay to be in an institution, the less confidence you have whenever you leave that institution. And so that's a nice little visual for people to help them understand what it is we talk about sacrificing when we walk through the doors, and what do we leave with? Is it a deficit of confidence?
We do have one comment around how can we hold folks accountable to a particular standard within Canada. I don't, Dr. Smith, if you want to comment on that. Ideas, suggestions on how to hold folks accountable?
I'm trying to read the question as well. I'm trying to scroll up to find.
Yeah, it's maybe 4 up.
Okay. And is it how can we hold
Assessment accountable to a standard in Canada?
Well said. Well, accountability is something that, as an entire society, I feel like over the last 20 years, we've talked about a lot more of in all institutions, business, education, legal, things of that nature. Accountability is about the managers and the people appointed. Sorry, give me a second. It's about the people in power actually executing that power in the way that it was entrusted to them. And sometimes when they're unwilling to execute that power in light of the way it was entrusted to them, they have to be held to account by the public, by the people that are aware of the processes involved in them doing the thing that they're supposed to do. And so that requires advocacy groups, community groups, activists of all sorts, really holding a magnifying glass, to that individual and what processes they're utilizing to do the thing that they're doing. So unfortunately, unless the people are actually holding themselves accountable, or they don't have their own internal metrics to do so, it's up to other individuals, typically advocates, community groups, to hold a magnifying glass to those people to get them to reveal the things that they've done or have not done, which ultimately leads to them being moved out of their position or refining their role a bit more, having other people to double check the work that they're doing.
And I would just like to add that, sorry, did you finish?
Go ahead.
I would just like to add that simply just listening, like that's really, really powerful. Just like letting them talk. Like sometimes if you can't like get anything done, you can't like quote unquote solve a problem, just listening makes all the difference. And just developing that relationship with that person, just making sure that they're comfortable with you, that they can come to you and just talk to you and listen to you. Because, you know, these issues that we experience, they're complex and they can't be solved in 1 or 2 sessions. It's not like, you know, you like check it off and like, you know, it's like a neat check mark and it's like it's solved. So just like listening and just being patient and just, you know, not judging them and not putting any blame on them, not taking anything personally. Like those concepts are just huge and they make such a big difference. Even if nothing is quote unquote solved, that in and of itself just helps everything.
Thank you. We had another question for both of you again. How would you describe or define cultural competence? Let's start with you, Dr. Smith.
And forgive me, I'm at the TDSB's head office, and so if you hear different noises, that's basically why, right? Timing was off a bit for when I got into a situated space to present. Cultural competence, great question. You can define it, there you go again with another one. You can define it in accordance with the way you would define any type of competence, right? When we say that we're competent at doing something, it means that we are fully aware of the knowledge bases that are required that go into executing a particular task or tool or a way of delivering a service, right? So when we say cultural competence, we're talking about how much knowledge do we have of the actual cultures, ethno-cultural backgrounds, nation states from which people that we're trying to serve come from. How aware are we and how up to date are we on that?
Bree, did you want to add to that? Or did you have anything you want to add?
Did he finish?
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's that's a big word, cultural competence, and how do you define it? I would just say I would say that it's an ongoing process, and I would say just doing as much research as you can ahead of time about the person's culture, about their culture, educating yourselves, and just, cultural competence it's an ongoing thing. So always just being able to keep up and educate yourself and be willing to learn new things every time you meet with your client, and just understanding that it's going to take a while, but as long as you're willing to understand and adapt along the way, you will get there. So in terms of how, I don't know if that answers your question, but I would just say it's really just educating yourself as much as possible about their culture, not coming in with any judgments, putting aside your biases, your preconceived notions, just coming in with an open mind and truly willing to take everything in and educate yourself as much as possible.
So to kind of jump on that, Pri, we did have a comment / question for you around your experience, and can you describe for us or share with us a time where you really felt valued and accepted in a particular space or an experience, and what was that like for you?
I would say there have been several times, I would say. I don't know if I can think of one specific time at this moment, but the current service I'm receiving now, the person that I'm working with right now, who I won't share any names just for confidentiality reasons, but what I enjoy working with her is that she just listens. She just gets it. She sometimes I find I'm struggling to find the words, but she just can say them for me. Now she also is another BIPOC person, so that makes all the difference. But that's what I enjoy about working with another BIPOC person. There's no judgment. We understand each other. Sometimes I may say things sometimes I'll tell her things that my parents say that are just embarrassing, right? That just would not be acceptable. And she just gets it. She's like, yeah, my parents would say the same thing. She's not judging my parents. Why are your parents talking like that? Or well, why are they thinking like that? She just gets it. And just, she's just no judgment. She just gets it.
We have another question for both of you on how to sort of assist immigrant families who have a hard time understanding autism. You both sort of touched on this in what you shared. So how to help them sort of understand from their own cultures, their own traditions, their own languages, but autism within, our sort of Western world context. Pri, Dr. Smith? Go ahead, Pri.
Oh, he
If
wants me
you
to go
have
first?
something to share, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was hoping he would go first. Oh gosh. This is, I think, yeah, this is something that even my own parents are still struggling with to this day. So I think, and like even for myself, like they don't fully understand that I'm on the spectrum. Like I have a brother that's on the spectrum, but he visibly shows more signs, and like I don't. Like I'm completely different from him. So it's like, well, like you're not on the spectrum. Like no, you don't have that. Like you weren't diagnosed when you were 3. You were diagnosed when you were in your 20s. Like you don't have that. So I think just, you really have to be extremely patient, and it's just going to take time. And lots of education, lots of education, and you just have to be open to what they're saying, and you have to understand that they're so set in their ways, that they haven't adapted to the Western culture, that they still have these strong beliefs from where they've come from embedded in them, and it's so strong. Like my parents have been here for more than 30 years, and still those beliefs are very strong with them. And just understanding that, that's okay. Validate them for how they feel. It's not their fault. It's okay. It's acceptable. It's understandable. But now how can we try to move things forward, and how do we open their mind? And I think just, validating that, what they're saying is valid, what you're saying is valid. These are two opposing ideas, and we just need to be open, be patient, and just be respectful, and just understand at the end of the day, what is the goal? We are trying to help this individual with autism. That is the goal. So just, understanding that's the goal. How can we come together? How can we bring two ideas together somehow? How can we take something from your culture, take something from my culture, bring them together, and just understand that, it's not about right or wrong, not about putting a person down. We are just saying what you're saying is valid. What I'm saying is valid. How can we help you? How can we help you?
So
I think
beautiful.
I was going to say that's so well put, especially, what struck me, Pri, in your answers. I'm thinking about, I work at an agency, work here at Geneva Center. So from that lens of, supporting the community of like, some people think, oh, well, you've been here for X number of years, or, even decades. You said your parents have been here for over 30 years. And then there's a bit of a automatic expectation then that you have switched or understand things from, if you were always born here in Canada, for example, and that's not necessarily the case, right? It's definitely deep rooted. And so you think about, I keep going back to what you said, Pri, around just listening and being there. I think that piece is huge. It seems simple, but to listen from where people are coming from, how they understand language, how they express themselves, what is important to them, regardless of what we might think is important. At the end of the day, they go home and they're within their family unit, and they're still going to do what's important to them. And so we need to meet them and understand them from where they're at. So it's so very important. So very well said. Dr. Smith, did you want to add to anything that Pri had to say?
There's not much I can add to what Pri did. She did it so well, but I'll try to quickly say, that institutions are meant to transform lives. Like good institutions, when they're operating correctly, they're meant to transform lives in a positive direction. And what that means is that if you have a family coming into an institution with particular thoughts, ideas, cultural norms, biases even, and you have institutional practitioners meeting that family where they are, trying to help them transform their lives within a Western, North American, Canadian context, then you're going to need culturally competent institutional practitioners who can do the work of cultural translation. That means you present them with the raw material and data from the place you're coming from, and they are able to translate what you think, what you hope for, what you want, and demonstrate the vehicles and avenues that can go down potentially within our institutional construct. And then also in meeting you where you are, help you recognize what things are outmoded in light of the context you're in right now, and in what ways you can have some of what you're used to having within this new system that you found yourself in. That work of cultural translation is so crucial. A good teacher is a good cultural translator. A person that works at Geneva, a good worker there is a cultural translator. They're able to meet you where you are, see what you're bringing to the table, and demonstrate to you what can stay and survive in this particular context, or what may need to be rethought or reconsidered in light of where you're coming from. And they do so with a level of compassion, empathy, and what I would hope is emotional intelligence. At the very end of my presentation, I talked about the IDI, the Intercultural Developmental Inventory, which is a psychometric assessment an individual or organization can do to really figure out where they are on the spectrum of cultural competence, and then figure out what next steps they need to take to become a more culturally competent practitioner or organization. So there are tools that exist, things that we can do, and we just need to employ them, right? If we're really serious about doing this work and ensuring that people that come into our institution leave with a level of confidence and less uncertainty about themselves.
Well said. I'm just scrolling through to see if there's any other questions. Keep them coming in the
Shelley,
comment box. Yeah.
there was
Go
a
ahead,
question about how was my experience at college. I can't find it now.
I can't find that one either, but if you
It
could
is there.
speak to that.
So long story short, my experience at York University was terrible. But my experience at Humber has been amazing, because when I entered Humber, I was much more confident in myself. I was at a place where I was doing better in life. I had the proper supports, and I was also in a program that I was truly passionate about. And because I also did York University before going to Humber, and York University was not a good time in my life. I did not have good supports. I was also going through a really bad time in my life mentally. So I think, having good supports is very important. Making sure that you are in a good place in your life and you're taking care of your mental health. That's very important. I cannot stress that enough. And getting the proper accommodations is very important. So you put all those things together, and you can be successful in college as long as you are doing something that you enjoy. Put all those things together, and anyone can be successful.
I think that's a great point. I think anyone can be successful. Anyone can experience joy. We all deserve to experience joy. And so puts, great importance to everything that we've been talking about today. Another question for both of you. Individual wrote that their organization supports the idea of promoting autism awareness, but sometimes families request that they don't do this for fear that their child will be further stigmatized in the classroom. So I would assume this is an educational setting. So any suggestions on how to approach such situations? Mather, Pri, any thoughts?
Just reading it a little bit more.
As am I.
In their child's class, for fear that. Oh wow.
This speaks to the stigma, right? This is speaks to the stigma. It's right there also in the question. And stigma is not something that's easily overcome, right? Because what I'm seeing in this question is fundamentally fear. And I think the question is asking, how do we lessen that fear? How do we reduce that fear so people are more comfortable sharing these pieces? Well, people are not comfortable, because the institution that they're trying to navigate isn't set up to properly accommodate their unique needs, or it is set up to accommodate their unique needs, but it hasn't been properly marketed to them, right? So if you have the latter problem where it's a marketing issue, there's nothing the family can do to overcome that fear. It's something the institution itself has to do to better market the various resources, spaces, and opportunities that exist for that family and their children to feel safe within the environment, right? Psychologically safe and physically safe within a particular environment. Now, if the institution is not set up to accommodate a diagnosis or designation of autism, then that's a different story, right? And that requires actual consultants and managers and leaders trying to figure out how to infuse within their space all the values necessary to ensure it's set up to accommodate that particular family and space. And sometimes that requires external audits. But again, the question is, well, who's running the external audit and who's calling on those people to do the audit of my actual space and institution or organization? And that's going to require the leader to do so. And that's where we have these silos, right? These spaces where, unfortunately, you might live in a particular environment, and in this environment, the institutions are not set up to accommodate your unique needs. And then you're going to have to look outside of yourself, right? So there are many people you can find online to be that kind of consultant, that auditor, to really advocate on your behalf to get an institution to change its practices. I know that GSA has done a lot of work in the last few years to make sure that they are living up to the very principles they put down in their policy documents. And so their leadership team actually seeks out those types of audits, those types of assessments to ensure that it's set up properly. You would need people to, or need institutions to reflect that kind of spirit if you want to see a shift. Getting over that stigma and fear, though, is going to require people convincing you that the space is set up to accommodate you. And if it isn't, telling you to your face and telling you honestly that it's not.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. Creating a safe space is important. And also it's important for service providers to give time for parents to open up. Don't take things at face value. Give them time to feel comfortable. Give them time to tell you how they really feel. Give them time to just be comfortable. But the very first step would be just to create that safe environment where people can have these open and honest conversations, and also just protecting the rights of everyone in the classroom, like not like pointing out, oh, this person has autism, like don't obviously like point that out, just present everything without judgment and just give everyone time and make them feel safe and secure and understood and heard and validated. And it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. That's all great points. And I think too, the responsibility of those service providers to do that work, as you said, Dr. Smith, and as you said, Priyanka, it takes time. It's not something that, you do one thing and then suddenly it switches and everything is going to be perfect. And so for both parties to recognize that, I think will allow a little bit of space for comfort for some families if they can actually see that the service provider is taking that responsibility to try and audit themselves on the work that they're doing, the spaces that they're creating. Then some of that fear and hope will go down, and comfort will increase.
Could I say, Shelley? Because I know we might run out of time. So if it's possible for you to provide everybody that showed up with my email address, if they had follow-up questions, things they want to know about, like the IDI or advocacy in general, I can connect them to individuals as well. I would love to be a resource.
Great. There have been some questions, Dr. Smith, on whether we're able to share some of your slides post the talk. Will that be available for folks?
Yeah, I'll make it available for you.
Great. And so we will share that along with Dr. Smith's email. So if you have questions, you can reach out to him directly. We are slowly coming to the end of our time here today. Dr. Smith, Priyanka, once again, thank you so much for this really engaging, enlightening talk today. I'm really hoping it's left everyone with some new things to think about and how you go into the world and how you present yourselves. And if you're someone who is supporting an individual within the community, how you think about the work that you do and how you can create more inclusive spaces, create space for listening, learning, sharing as we move forward. As I've said already, recording of this presentation will be available on the SHIFT website. Will also be a link to it will also be emailed to those of you that pre-registered for the talk today. We will be sharing within the next week Dr. Smith's email and slides from today's presentation for all of you to be able to review and take a look at. Once again, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Dr. Smith, Priyanka Paul, and for everyone here joining us, thank you for being here. The questions were wonderful and engaging. Way too many to get all into the time today, but I'm hopeful that the ones that we did get to and the answers that were shared, we all benefited from. As well, after this presentation, there is a link to a short survey if you could please take the time to do that survey. We always want to hear from you how we can improve topics that you might have for us in the future. So please take the time to share that with us. We really value your feedback. So thanks again so much. Thank you to all of you that's joining here today. We're going to sign off. All the best. Take care.